Hi, I'm going to talk to you a little bit to start you off and to get you going with doing a little bit of clicker training with your dog. These are two sorts of clickers. That's one with a little button, makes a little tiny click. That's what they call a box clicker, which makes quite a loud click. It's quite good for using outside. As I've done that, I've got little faces have just appeared around me because I've got some dogs who are already clicker associated. But what I thought I'd just do with you, I thought it might be quite fun for you to have a go at doing some clicker association and then starting to use clicker with your dog in your training, as you have the opportunity at the moment to do some fairly concentrated work with your dog if you so wish. All of mine are quite well clicker associated apart from Dora. So I rather thought that whilst we were going through the process with you, we could go through the process with Dora. So when I've done just a little bit of theory with you, we'll have a little go at doing a bit of work with Dora. You need a clicker. You might have one knocking around in a drawer somewhere. Sometimes I say to people, have you ever done clicker training? And they go, oh, I've got a clicker, but I don't know what to do with it. So it's in a drawer somewhere. If you've got one, dig one out. If you haven't, you can get them very easily from a pet shop, possibly. Pet shops are still open at the moment. Or from Amazon. You'll easily get one from Amazon, and they're a couple of quid. So if you fancy having a play at this, then you can do that. You'll also need some little tiny soft treats that get swallowed and yummied very quickly, and these need to be high value, not kibble, because they need to be taken in fairly quickly while we're going to do the loading phase of your clicker game. Now I'm using, just to sort of help, I've been clicker training dogs for about 25 years now. I've used clicker. The lady called Karen Pryor, who first introduced it to us in this country, who was a dolphin trainer, written a fabulous book called Don't Shoot the Dog, which was my sort of first introduction to clicker training. I had German Shepherds at the time working in obedience, and I found it really, really useful. I've since gone on to use clicker in all sorts of different areas, and have also used another lady who I'll talk to you about in a minute. So I don't know whether any of you have seen this book, When Pigs Fly. Jane Killian, absolutely fantastic. She actually has English Bull Terriers in America. She does agility with English Bull Terriers. Anybody that's ever owned an English Bull Terrier knows what an amazing thing that is to do. She uses clicker, and she makes it very clear. So I'm just going to base what I'm telling you on the way that she suggests that you load the clicker and why we have a clicker. When we move on a little bit to do maybe a little bit more gun doggy stuff or something, then this lady, Helen Phillips, has written a manual called Clicker Gun Dog. And the exercises in there, terrific fun to do. A lot of it, the stuff that we'll be working through over the next few weeks, is stuff that you can do indoors, even with your more advanced dogs, because it can help with your hand deliveries, it can help with your positioning, it can help with your walking to heel. Jane Killian does a lot of work with calming using clicker. So, you know, I will be referring to other eminent trainers as we go along, and just putting my own slant on it as well, and watching how Dora responds to any of this, which will mean I will need to rig up my iPad, not just have it sitting on a couple of booze bottles actually on my kitchen table, which haven't found a place in the reorganisation of the kitchen cupboards. So the first thing that we need to talk about is why use one of these instead of just using a word. Yes, good. We've talked about that in our training classes, some of you that have been there, when you go, wow, yes, good. The reason for it is that the clicker, the clicker doesn't have any other associations with the sound of this. Our voice has other associations to the dog. Doesn't matter how often we try and say yes in exactly the same way. There are different nuances, different body positions that we might use. So unless you're doing all of those things the same, then your reward marker in a voice is not quite as clear. It's still useful and it would still be used, and you're not always going to have a clicker with you. But to start with, this little beastie, this little sound, Karen Pryor believes this works on the limbic system of the brain. So the parasympathetic area where there is no thought process. That as we link this to the food, we have a conditioned reward response. So the dog isn't thinking about that response. They hear the clicker, as mine have just done now. I've got two little expectant faces sitting next door to me now. They've heard this, and this means, yippee, we're doing something. This is great fun. This is not a remote control. This is a reinforcer. It will actually tell the dog, wow, you've done something really fantastic there. We're not going to use it to get the dog's attention. But to start with, it'll seem like that because we're coupling it with the food. Does that make sense to you? So to start with, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the dog feeling happy and contented with the behaviour that it's given you because you have marked exactly the point they did that. So if we took the example of the placeboard, which we will be using the clicker for, that the dog actually understands that if it sits beside the placeboard, it doesn't get anything. If it sits the other side of the placeboard, it doesn't get anything. If it puts one paw on the placeboard, it doesn't get anything. When it puts its body on the placeboard, we click and the dog goes, yay, I've got that right. Now, because it's working in that part of the brain, it's not actually working in the thinking part of the brain. It's working in the limbic system, the brain. But what it is, the behaviour that the dog is giving at that time is then being reinforced at that point in time. To start with, we need to load the clicker, what we call load the clicker. So we need to make sure that this sound means something to the dog. And those things are going to have to be coupled very shortly and quickly together so that we get what we would term as a classical conditioned response. And that's all we're going to do to start with. So I'm going to switch off for a second. I'm going to pop this video out to you on YouTube, and then I'm going to go and get myself organised to set it up, and I'm going to get Dora loading on the clicker. And then what I suggest we do is you need to do this a couple of times a day, 20 responses, a couple of times a day for 2 days. When we've all done that, those of you that want to play the game, when you come back, then we'll start actually going on to the next stage. But until you've actually associated that clicker, we're not ready to do that. Okay? So I will sign off on this one, leave you thinking about this, and then we will move on to the next phase and we'll get a dog out, which will be a lot more interesting for you. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I should have said to you about clickers. Don't think so. There are some people who suggest using clicker when you're working with a fearful dog. There is a school of thought that says you need to be very careful about that because of the area of the brain that the clicker is actually working in, which is the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain. So you've got to be a little bit careful if your dog is very fearful in a situation and we start using clicker. So I just want to hold back a little bit. Those are my folk with reactive dogs, just to just bear that in mind, because we might be able to use it in certain situations for your reactive dogs, but it's not something that I would necessarily suggest you do, certainly not at this stage. We will meet again in a minute.